Hey everybody, I'm Mimi Herman, and I want to start by thanking Kelly Shin for coming up with this amazing idea and all the hard work she's put into it to make it happen. I wanted to thank all the other wonderful and generous writers in this series, and I also want to thank you for listening and giving whatever you can to help out our neighbors in Western North Carolina now and in the years to come. So the reading that I'm going to be doing today, I would love it if you could donate to bridgingthegapsnc.org, a great organization. So I studied writing at Warren Wilson at the MFA program in Swannanoa, and when I saw those pictures of the houses up to their roofs in water, and I heard the stories, it broke my heart. And in the weeks that followed Hurricane Helene, I was so struck by how North Carolina came together as a community to help our neighbors. I mean, it just happened everywhere. We're good that way, North Carolinians, and people outside of North Carolina who love North Carolina. So today I want to share with you two pieces. They're both from my novel, The Kudzu Queen, and they're both pretty short. And one is about how neighbors come together to help after disaster. The other thing I also saw was that there were some people who came in and tried to take advantage of the situation for their own devices. And so there's a little bit of that going on in my book too. So I'm going to start with somebody, one of those advantage takers, and then I'm going to end on a hard note, but a good note about what we do when we come together to help others. So your narrator today is Maddie Lee Watson, a 15-year-old girl who wants to be the kudzu queen, and she wants the kudzu king to fall madly in love with her, though he's twice her age. You can imagine this may lead to disaster. Um, so this is when she first sees the kudzu king. The doors on the truck read Mr. James T. Cullowhee, the kudzu king, but you had only to look at him to know he was royalty. Imagine that, a man in a suit and tie when it wasn't a Sunday wedding or funeral, and such a man with golden hair like the Greek gods we'd studied in junior high. His suit was the forget-me-not blue of his eyes. His white shirt so bright you had to squint to look at him. As for his tie, you couldn't tell if he'd chosen that green to match his truck or had the truck painted to go with the tie. He vaulted over the side rail and stood astride a mountain of leafy cuttings. Ladies and gentlemen of Cooper County, my name is James T. Cullowhee, and I've come to bring you the crop of the future. More versatile than cotton, more profitable than tobacco, more nutritious than corn, this crop will feed your family and livestock and fill your bank account with cold, hard cash. Boys abandoned their baseball game. Mothers stepped out from the grocery doorway in small gatherings of curiosity, while girls, little and big, drew closer. Lynette and I hopped down from the school steps to stand at the back of the crowd. Kudzu, the wonder crop. He picked up a handful of vines and let them flow like a waterfall from his palm. It'll grow anywhere you plant it. No plowing, no fertilizer, no weeding. It needs barely a drop of water. Excellent forage for your horses, cattle, and mules, and a ground cover like you've never seen. So the next passage I want to read to you is about one of those disasters. When you hear about disasters, you always hear about fires and floods. So you all had a flood. I'm giving you a fire. People always say it woke me up in the middle of the night, as if anything momentous has to happen at the stroke of 12. But when the roaring sound barreled through my bedroom window, it was 3:47 in the morning. I know because I jumped up, dodging Lynette's cot and the girls wrapped in blankets on the floor, and grabbed the alarm clock. Once I was awake, I barely heard it, but in my dreams, it was monstrous. I ran into my parents' bedroom and shook them, shouting, "Get up! Something's happening at the Johnson farm." Daddy burrowed deeper into his pillow, but Mama jolted upright. "What's wrong?" Beyond the cornfields, a bright orange hole glowed. By the time we got there, Daddy in overalls he pulled on top of his pajamas, Mama and the Johnson girls and me in our long white nightgowns, and Joey in a t-shirt and pajama bottoms, all of us in unlaced boots. The fire in the Johnsons' kudzu field was blazing with wicked glee. We weren't the only ones who'd rushed over. Luther Moore and other farmers from down the road were already there, forming a bucket brigade to bring water from the creek. Keep the children away, Daddy shouted. Mama kept Aggie and Catherine close, and Lynette hovered alongside. I grabbed an abandoned bucket and ran out to the creek. The fire was gobbling dried grasses and sending runners toward the house. Danny, Mama suddenly wailed. I realized he hadn't come with us. I hadn't heard him come home the night before, which meant he was asleep in one of the beds at the Johnsons'. And so was the Kudzu King. I dropped the bucket by the creek and dashed after Mama as she raced to the house, Catherine in her arms, Aggie and Lynette behind her. She pounded on the door, yelling, Danny, Daniel. The fire behind us grew more confident, eating up weeds and volunteer saplings. Daniel, Mama screamed. The door opened, and there stood Danny, his hair sticking up and a slow-witted look on his face. Mama, he asked, what are you doing here? Behind him, the Kudzu King looked much the same, with a day's growth of beard and a misbuttoned shirt. Fire! Mama pointed at the hungry tongues of flame licking at the peeling paint of the woodshed. Get out of that house right now! Aggie darted from behind Mama's legs and pulled at Danny's hand, while Lynette beside me stared as the fire cracked open the woodshed like a nutshell and dug into the sweet meat of split logs inside. Catherine wailed like a coyote. Mr. Cullowhee dashed back into the hall. Where's he going? Mama stroked Catherine's hair to calm her. Papers, Mr. Cullowhee called, running upstairs. There's no time for papers, Mama yelled. Get out of here now. These men need your help. But he was down in a few seconds, a crate of neat file folders in his arms. He and Danny ran out of the house and veered in opposite directions. Danny toward the fire, grabbing a bucket from the yard and filling it with quick spurts at the pump. Mr. Cullowhee away from the fire with his precious box of papers. The chickens ran around in a frenzy. The two goats in the barn cried like babies for their mothers. Danny fought the fire while Lynette opened the henhouse door, and Aggie shooed the chickens out, waving her hands and yelling. They fled in an explosion of feathers, maybe never to return, but at least not trapped inside and burned to ashes. Mama and I ran for the goats and grabbed their collars. Mama, still holding Catherine, led them across the road where the fire would have nothing to eat. Get a rope, she called, and I found one looped over the fence. She threaded it through the collars of both goats and tied them to a tree. Remember, they're here. We'll move them if we have to. She kicked at the hog pen until the fence came down and the hogs squealed off into the woods. Meanwhile, the men were putting out the fire in one part of the field, only to have it erupt in another. Mr. Cullowhee joined Danny at the pump and took the bucket from him as soon as he could fill it, running for the woodshed. Lynette and Aggie gathered more buckets from around the yard. You fill, Lynette told Aggie, who took Danny's place at the pump, freeing him to attack the fire directly with Lynette and me. We waited for Aggie and Mama, who joined her to pump water as quickly as they could. Forget the shed, Danny shouted. It's gone. Keep the fire away from the house. But there was no keeping the fire away from the treat it had been saving for dessert. It licked up the new paint and dug into the old boards beneath it, climbing walls and racing through doors, eating window frames raw, hungry for everything it could reach. The house became a flare that brought people from miles away. The bucket brigade lengthened as more neighbors joined and divided as if by mitosis into several lines, creek to house, creek to woods, creek to field of formerly thriving kudzu. The pump was abandoned, too close to the house, too slow, too dangerous. We stopped the fire before it could move beyond the Johnson farm, but not before it ate their house alive, leaving only charred bones. Lynette cried throughout. a steady stream of tears running down her soot-covered face while she passed buckets, while she stomped hungry little flames, while she held the little girls way too tightly. She never stopped to wipe them away. I don't think she even noticed. Thank you so much, and please give everything you can to help our neighbors out in the western part of the state.